What is up, everybody? This is Jage here with Team Rankstar. I am here with Lateralus from our competitive team. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. So, as you know, Lateralus, and those of you who are watching, we are going to do a really quick patch rundown for this balance patch that was just released right after, or it was just released today, which is after week 4 of the qualifiers for the Master Series. So just what we're going to do is we're going to take about a minute per topic, give you about 10 to 15 minutes of what Lateralis thinks, and this is just simply his opinions on where things are going. So just to get started, what's your general impressions on how this patch is going to affect the meta decks? And the reason I ask that is because it was stated that it wasn't going to affect their playability.
Yeah, I think overall this patch was trying to do a lot or too much, in my opinion, with given the timing after the fourth qualifier and only about, I think, about 19 days or so till QuakeCon. I think it's definitely going to affect the strength of a couple of decks and even an archetype or two, maybe. So I think that the timing is a little odd for how many changes they were trying to, or they did push through on this patch.
Not to mention, I mean, it affects the playoffs, even though there is some time between, QuakeCon, as stated. It's just affecting the playoffs, which I don't think was foreseen before making the announcement, right?
Yeah, so I mean, we all knew that there was a possibility that there'd be a tie for the points for the last 4 spots, and so it's TDC Jason, Frogger, and Mazaboom who have to do kind of like a round robin to fight for 2 spots basically. And if I'm not mistaken, those have to be done by Thursday. So they literally have 3 days to now evaluate these changes and try to bring 4 decks to fight for their 2 spots. And it can be hard to have time set aside, and it's like, okay, now I have to just grind for 3 days to try to prepare, or within 3 days. And it can also affect, these changes obviously affect certain decks more than others, and that can affect players unequally. And I think it's kind of unfair almost to them as players to give such limited time on preparation.
Right. I mean, at the very least, it's going to be interesting. So I think that's certainly a fair statement to make. So let's jump into the cards, right? That's kind of the meat and potatoes of what everyone's coming in here for. So let's start with Manner. Was it the right card in Halalu to go ahead and make an adjustment to? And do you think it's going to even make it slow enough?
That's a loaded question. So was it my choice to hit in the deck? No. As far as Haunted Manor goes, I do think that it is going to be a little bit too slow now. It's at least to be a 3 of. I think that it will accomplish its original intention of trying to, in those a little bit grindier games that go towards the mid or late game, still being able to put out, threats as opposed to just small creatures flooding the board.
Right.
I think it still will be able to do that, but I don't. Hlalu aggro is still going to be just as aggressive without Haunted Manor. You just may not have those explosive turn 2 Manor into Oathman type plays, but you can still, with the ring, go 5th Legion, Oathman into all Court Clan Captain, Nord Firebrand, and blow some out of the water still. So that's not going to change.
So, and kind of in the same vein, Mudcrab. Let's move on to the next card, right? Mudcrab has seen a lot of hype, let's say, and not necessarily for all the wrong reasons, but I think something that people think more of is in the RNG play, but where we saw the change was in the adjustment to the stats. So do you think it will still see play, and does it really affect the red aggro decks?
So I think it definitely is still going to see play. This nerf only really affects its playability. Well, it doesn't affect its playability. It affects its effectiveness versus blue. You know, it always was able to trade efficiently into like Wardcrafter and things of that nature, but blue's still kind of meh at the moment.
Right.
So I don't think it's really gonna. It's still going to accomplish what all the red aggro decks need. It gives me a card, and it can still carry my weapons and buff effects.
Perfect. Great answer. And I generally do agree. So speaking of blue, right? We had the change to Telvas Magister. So how is this affecting the decks that are playing Telvas, and does it increase the mid-range viability?
So I think it's actually going to affect archetypes differently. So one of my favorite decks, mid-range Battle Mage, I think it's going to affect it more than, say, like Tribunal Control. The reason for that being is with mid-range Battle Mage, you're always wanting to use Telvos to contest threats. And now, especially against like other mid-range or even the red aggro decks, it's a lot easier for them to just ping the ward off, and they don't actually have to kill it now, which you always wanted to try to 2-for-1 with that card and save damage from your face. And it's no longer going to be able to do that for that deck. I think for Control Tribunal, it still may be able to do enough with just stopping damage, because typically when you get to the late game, you can protect it, and then you can just start using your targeted removal towards the threats your opponent's playing while maintaining the ward on your face, so to speak.
Right. And by that time, the other thought too, with thinking about with Tribunal, if you are playing the deck with Ward Crafters where you normally would combo that with your Daggerfall mages, if you don't use it by the late game, at least you have another target that's really viable for Wardcrafter, right? Would you agree?
Yeah. So mid-range Battle Mage, Lesser Wards, Wardcrafter, Sentinel Battle Maces, you know, typically you're trying to hit those on your Daggerfalls or your Breton Conjurers, but now you do have a reason to have to use it on that. But again, I think it's just going to affect it more because you're trying to contest with Telvos a lot more with that deck.
Perfect. All right, so let's move on to Hand of Daygoth. So are you surprised by I think this is the one that surprised everyone, but do you think it's surprising, and is it even a relevant change?
I think it did surprise a lot of people just because I guess I just don't think Daygoth it's a tough deck to crack. It's hard to find like a really good version of it. You see a lot of people that did play it as like a fourth deck in the qualifiers. If it's relevant, that's a very good question. I'm not really sure. I guess only time will tell how much this will actually affect it. My biggest thing is that it's not going to be too relevant because even lightning bolts are falling out of the meta because of all the red aggro and Lalu decks. They're just not very efficient.
I mean, people are talking about removing lightning bolt is a common thing now.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, a lot of the blue-based decks don't accept maybe Tribunal Control. But maybe there's some, you know, a lot of different maths that we can't think of with aggro. You know, you might be able to ping the ward off, and then 4 is probably a lot easier to trade into than 5, where 2 creatures or maybe even 1 with a buff could trade into that more effectively. And now, so maybe it will be relevant there, but it's kind of hard to say.
Right. And not to jump too much away from what was actually, balanced in this patch. I think what a lot of people forget is that I think the Daygoth card that everyone was expecting to be nerfed was Ash Berserker, because people don't always remember Ash Berserker is actually a Daygoth card, but it's played in Hlaalu and Crusader. It's not really played traditionally Daygoth. It's played in more than just Daygoth. So I just wanted to point that out there. Moving on to the next card. So we have Duke. Well, this one will probably be really quick. I'll just say really quick. My personal opinion, doesn't really change much.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what it changes at all. Again, Lightning Bolt's not really in the meta. It wasn't really a concern like, you know, maybe old Brynjolf, where it's like, oh, this card's really good, but it just dies a Lightning Bolt. Again, there's not really any Lightning Bolts around right now, so it's not really, it's still do nothing.
It still gets hit by hard removal.
It still gets hit by hard removal, I think, and it's never the issue is getting it to survive the first turn. It's the fact that it just does nothing the first turn. So I think a lot of people were wanting to trigger on itself when it first came down. And, you know, that would be pretty cool. You could get, you know, like Septum Guardsman or Nord Firebrand or Curses or whatever Lalu card you wanted. You know, typically probably a Firebrand, but that'd be pretty cool. Make them a lot more playable than I think this buff, quote unquote, buff is or will.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Hey, we're here for your opinion, not whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing, right? So let's move on to the fun ones, right? So Uprising, is the cost increase even enough to make an impact? I know that there's a few theories around on that. And what is going to end up being hurt most by that? Is it Scout Tribunal versus Tavani? Which one? What's really affected here?
I think the deck that's affected the most is Scout, and that's simply because of the next card we'll talk about that was also hit. As far as Tribunal or Nyx goes, I don't think it's going to be too big of an issue because typically when you need to combo off with that card, it's versus control decks anyways, and so you just naturally have more time, and you have more ramp tools in Tribunal and Nyx than you do, you know, just Scout. So I definitely think it is going to affect Scout more than Tribunal or Telvanni.
And that's generally the consensus I've heard from the competitive side, is the math is still there. It's just you're slowing it down a little bit. It's not going to make a giant impact overall.
Yeah, I really don't. Like I said, against aggro and stuff, you're typically controlling the board. You don't just need to combo off as early as possible. A lot of times you're just playing tempo plays anyways with Nyx just to, you know, dominate the board. And again, first control, you have more time.
Cool. All right. So I know we're going to want to talk a lot about this one, but we will try and keep it as quick as possible. So Drain Vitality, was it the right choice? There was a lot of speculation about Word Wall. Was that effect change better than cost change? Where did you stand in that whole dilemma around that DV change?
So I was one for wanting Word Wall to be hit over Drain Vitality. If Drain Vitality did get hit, this is not the change I was hoping for. I was hoping the cost would just be increased. So this is
right.
A lot of people say it's not as good as it was, but it's not bad. I completely disagree. This card, I think it's unplayable. People argue like, well, you can force them to split lanes. It's like, well, they could already split lanes on you, and a lot of people do versus Scout anyways, because
that's a very common card. Right, that's a very common thing to do versus Scout anyways.
Exactly. So it's not actually, it's not changing the way people play against Scout really. I guess another thing is, like, people don't realize the reason that Scout could play these, you know, card cycle and big cards and like low tempo plays was because it had efficiency turns 5 through 7 or so where they could, you know, hit the board with an efficient removal spell. And right. It's still 3 cards that you need to use a level 3 Drain Vitality. Now this is 3 cards for a card that's slightly better than Firestorm, whereas before it was a better Ice Storm. So that's a big difference if you think about how often you see Firestorm versus how often you see Ice Storm. I think most Scouts are going to be removing this card, and because of that, they're going to be having to remove the number of Word Walls in their deck probably, because you don't want 3 Word Walls and then only 3 Shouts as well. So it's just kind of weird. Cool. We'll see what the refined lists look like at QuakeCon.
All right. And 2 minutes really quick. So I already talked about Ash Berserker. Let's talk about maybe 1 or 2 other cards that weren't hit that you're surprised, you know, should have been in that balance patch. Whether it's buffs, and let's do a buff and a nerf that you were expecting that didn't happen.
Oh, geez. First, I do just want to say real quick, I do back you up on the Ash Berserker. There were like 47 copies of Ash Berserkers in the qualifying deck so far. I think it might have been the most card. It is insanely strong. Anyways, I think a lot of people thought Oathman would be hit over Haunted Manor.
I did see that.
I agreed. I do think that the Haunted Manor nerf does slightly nerf the Oathman, but I still think the Oathman is what ultimately gives a lot of the snowball potential. So I would have liked to see that as well. As far as buffs, geez, that could be anything. it would be cool to see some of the other, non-playable shouts got a buff, but I don't think that's happening anytime soon. I think any of the like the Redoran legendary could have been buffed a little bit. Maybe if he had had a little bit more attack power. Most people that do play Redoran add in the Forerunner.
I think that's a good.
The legendary.
I think that's a good call out. Is Redoran deserved a buff in this balance? I think a good balance patch, if you really truly call it a balance patch, would have been giving Redoran a little something.
Yeah, definitely that, or there may be a reason to play. I don't think it's just Spell Sword and Mage are just too far behind Tribunal right now, so I think it would have been really tough. So I would have looked at Redoran maybe. But yeah, I really like that card because it's a unique legendary, but its effect kind of makes it not a unique legendary, so to speak.
Right.
So I would have liked him to be a little bit more playable, I think.
Awesome. Well, that pretty much concludes everything from the balance patch. Anything really quick that you wanted to say that we didn't cover?
No, nothing too much. Good luck to our 3 contenders for the playoffs in the next couple of days, and good luck to all of the players that did qualify for QuakeCon, and let's hope for a TRS final, right?
Yeah. Let's just go ahead and say hype out to our teammates who are going to be going to these to the Masters in Texas, and we are hoping for a Team Rankstar win. But we're gonna go ahead and close this out. This is Jage with Lateralus for Team Rankstar. We're signing out. Thank you.